France has been one of Ukraine's staunchest European supporters ever since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. The country's president, Emmanuel Macron, has repeatedly lambasted Vladimir Putin for his actions, even going so far as to be one of the first to suggest that NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine might be a possibility. France has also provided Ukraine with 8.6 billion euros, or about $9.97 billion, in military aid since Putin invaded. But now France just did something bigger than anything it's done before. In a landmark declaration, France has pledged to offer something that Putin can't believe. The Ukraine war may be about to be turned on its head. Why? Well, the details of the deal explain everything. In its November 17th report on the new agreement, the Kyiv Independent said that France has pledged to sell 100 Rafale Dassault fighter jets to Ukraine, massively boosting the country's air force in the process. Ukraine's air defense needs are also being met, as France will sell some SAMP air defense systems. Ukraine is on the hunt for 8 of these systems, each of which typically comes with 6 launchers, though it's unclear how many France is prepared to sell as part of the new deal. Though these are Ukraine's headline purchases, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that aerial bombs, air-to-air missiles, and radars for air defense systems will also be part of the French package. This is huge for Ukraine, and very bad news for Putin. With just one deal, France is filling some of the major gaps that Ukraine has in its arsenal, particularly on the air defense front, while also equipping it with plenty of fighter jets that its forces can use to unleash bombs and missiles onto Putin's occupiers inside Ukraine. Macron added more when speaking alongside Zelensky after the two leaders met in Paris. He said that the SAMP that France will sell to Ukraine aren't just pulled from France's stockpiles. These are brand new, next-generation air defense systems that are currently in development. Ukraine will be receiving one of the first of these new systems to come off the production lines, with Macron adding, "Ukraine already knows the characteristics of this system, but now these will be new, enhanced characteristics." In its report on the new deal, the Kyiv Post adds that this is a major step towards Ukraine rebuilding and modernizing an air force that earlier in the war relied almost entirely on Soviet-era technology. You could also see this as another leap forward for Ukraine's efforts to integrate its systems with those of its NATO allies, in addition to being another move that gives NATO the defensive arsenal it needs to deal with Russia's long-range drones. Unfortunately, there's a caveat, and it's a pretty big one. Ukraine won't be receiving the 100 Rafales and the new air defenses all in one package. Instead, the deal is part of a 10-year security pact signed between France and Ukraine, meaning the French fighters are going to be drip-fed into Ukraine over the next decade, presumably as and when Ukraine is able to afford them. However, even that caveat can't take the shine off what France has just done for Ukraine, and Zelensky knows it. "New aircraft, new reinforcements, new steps to strengthen our army and our country," Zelensky said after signing the deal. "I'm very grateful to France, to President Emmanuel Macron, and the entire French nation." The caveat also shows Putin something important. France is betting on Ukraine over the long term. The Kyiv Post adds that the new deal builds on a series of joint Ukrainian-French defense projects, which include the two countries cooperating on technology development for drones and interceptor UAVs that are used to take out Russian drones in the skies. That particular project is slated to begin next year, and such a big commitment by France shows Putin that it believes that Ukraine will retain its sovereignty. This isn't just a deal designed to help Ukraine win the war against Russia. It's a deal that further integrates Ukraine into the European defense community for at least the next decade, ensuring the country will be able to maintain and build upon its existing strength even when the war is over. Ukraine should at least get a handful of the Rafales it wants to purchase fairly soon, the Kyiv Post suggests. It says that some of the jets may come from France's existing stock, meaning that all Ukraine and France need to do is settle on a price and then arrange delivery. Others will be built for Ukraine as part of a long-term acquisition program that will likely see Ukraine commit money so that France can get to work on building the new jets. One thing is for certain, Ukraine's air force and air defenses both just received massive boosts. To understand why, we only need to look at the 2 headline weapons that Ukraine will be acquiring from France as part of the new deal. The Dassault Rafale is an interesting fighter jet, because it sits somewhere between the 4th and 5th generations. It stands as one of Europe's top multi-role fighters, the Kyiv Post says, because it's capable of doing almost anything that Ukraine might need a fighter jet to do. Deep strikes are a possibility, as are naval operations and general air superiority missions. Ukraine should never need to have the Rafale's ability to launch nuclear weapons, but it's another feature, and not a bad one for the jets to have, should the war escalate to the point where France needs to start throwing its nuclear weight around. With 100 Rafale jets, Ukraine's air force gets elevated to among the best that Europe has to offer, and the fighter's specifications reveal why. According to Army recognition, the Rafale is going to be the lead combat aircraft in the French armed forces until at least 2040, which shows us that Ukraine isn't just buying some Western cast-offs in this new deal. The Rafale is extremely agile, especially when considering its heavy weapons load, and it incorporates an electronic survival system named Spectra. That system may be the jet's most important feature. Spectra, which stands for Self-Protection Equipment to Counter Threats for Rafale Aircraft, is an electronic warfare suite that offers the Rafale several interesting capabilities. Pilots can detect incoming threats from long ranges, along with using the system to identify and localize a range of laser, infrared, and electromagnetic threats. Radar, missile, and laser warning systems are also built into Spectra, also that the Rafale pilot can avoid tangible threats in the sky and complete their missions regardless of an enemy's attempts to use electronic warfare of their own to knock the jet off course. So the Rafale is built for survivability, but it also hits like a truck. The jet can be equipped with SAMP precision-guided weapons, Exocet anti-ship missiles, laser-guided bombs, and the Mica air-to-air interception missile. It can also be loaded with Scalp or Storm Shadow long-range missiles, which Ukraine has been using for much of its war against Russia. France and its European partners also already field the long-range Meteor air-to-air missile, which Ukraine may eventually have access to. Finally, there's the Nexter 30M 791 30mm gun built into every Rafale, which can fire up to 2,500 rounds per minute. Ukraine can adjust the jet's loadout based on mission requirements, and with so many options available, the Rafale may become the most versatile fighter jet in Ukraine's entire arsenal. Adding to that versatility is an impressive range of 3,700 kilometers, or just under 2,300 miles. That's more than enough to allow Ukraine to launch Rafale-based missions anywhere within the occupied territories, and if Ukraine gets brave enough, could even allow for direct strikes on Russian territory. Combine that range with a top speed of 1,800 kilometers, or around 1,110 miles per hour, and you have a jet that is agile, hard-hitting, and capable of exceeding the speed of sound when it's flying at full tilt. And Ukraine is going to be getting 100 of them over the course of the next decade. The Rafale isn't the absolute best Western aircraft that Ukraine could possibly get its hands on. The F-35 is better, especially for stealth missions. Plus, national interest points out that a Western wargame simulation that involved US-made F-22s and Rafales saw an F-22 take out 6 Rafales and engage another 5 in combat until the pilot of a Rafale managed to lock onto the F-22 with an infrared missile to take it down. Still, the French jet is among the best of the rest, and it's arguably the top European jet that Ukraine could hope to get its hands on. Russia should be scared. The next decade is going to see Ukraine's aerial might multiply several times over. With such an impressive jet heading Ukraine's way under this new deal with France, it can be easy to forget that Ukraine will also be buying something that it very much needs in the present. Russia has been taking advantage of Ukraine's weakening air defenses by launching massive drone and missile assaults that Ukraine is struggling to defend itself against. These aerial bombardments have been working, at least in the sense that they are overwhelming Ukraine's air defenses. On November 12th, Ukraine Business News reported that Ukraine's drone interception rate for October 2025 was lower than for any other single month since the beginning of 2024. Russia launched a staggering 5,298 drones at Ukraine during October, and Ukraine's air defenses managed to take down 80% of them. While that's still a strong percentage, it still means that over 1,000 of Russia's drones broke through Ukraine's air defenses and struck their targets. That's unacceptable to Ukraine. The SAMP-T systems that France will be selling may become a key part of the air defense puzzle that Ukraine is still trying to solve. Nobody's going to claim that the SAMP-T is a silver bullet for dealing with Russia's drones and missiles, of course. Ukraine won't suddenly rocket up to achieving an interception rate of close to 100%, even with these systems on the ground. But what it will be getting is as many of these systems as it can afford and that France can provide. And those systems will help Ukraine to at least deal better with Russia's cruise missiles. Army technology says that the SAMP-T was designed specifically as an anti-missile system capable of defending key tactical cities. The outlet also mentions that the system can tackle both manned and unmanned aerial vehicles, along with cruise missiles and tactical ballistic missiles that fall within the 600-kilometer or 372-mile range class. Each SAMP-T launcher comes with 8 missile containers that are loaded onto the back of an 8x8 truck chassis. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine is looking for 8 of these systems, each of which has 6 launchers. That tells us that a single SAMP-T system can rattle off up to 48 air defense missiles before it needs to be reloaded. Speaking of missiles, the SAMP-T uses the Aster-30 Block 1 missile, which has a directional blast warhead capable of directing warhead fragments toward a single target. The missile uses a combination of inertial navigation and guidance correction data transmitted from the ground to give it the best possible chance of hitting its target. And with its 100-kilometer or 62-mile range, the system provides a solid mid-range option that Ukraine can use to tackle missiles and drones. Given that the SAMP-T is loaded onto a truck chassis, that should clue you into the fact that this is a mobile defense system. That's vital for dealing with Russia's aerial assaults, which can cover the length and breadth of Ukraine. The system's radars also offer it 360-degree detection and engagement, plus a single SAMP-T system can track up to 100 targets at a time, engaging 10 of them simultaneously based on whatever priority criteria that Ukraine sets. And all of this just covers the base model. Ukraine will be buying the updated version of the SAMP-T, which is likely the SAMP-T NG or Next Generation. MBDA Systems, which helps to build the air defense system alongside Thales, says that the NG variant will feature improved ballistic missile interception capabilities, a high rate of fire, and a new multifunction radar. Ukraine will find out more once the system starts rolling off the production lines, but it's also already familiar enough with the SAMP-T to make great use of any base models that it might receive as part of the new deal with France. We said at the beginning of the video that France has just done something big for Ukraine. Now you understand how. But the most important thing about the new deal is that it appears to have been designed specifically to help Ukraine overcome some of the key challenges that it faces in its war against Russia, both now and in the future. And one of those challenges is something that we've already touched on. Ukraine needs more air defenses, and it needs them as soon as possible. The statistics related to Russia's October drone launch numbers and Ukraine's interception struggles hint at an issue that's been plaguing Ukraine for most of the war. Zelensky has repeatedly called for Ukraine's Western allies to provide more air defenses, with one of the most recent of those calls coming in November. Mission of Ukraine to NATO reports Zelensky as saying, "It's crucial to continue strengthening our air defense. Ukraine needs air defense systems and missiles for them. We must expand the Pearl Initiative, through which we receive weapons for our defense, intensify efforts to involve countries that have not yet joined, and increase contributions." Zelensky made that statement on November 15th. 2 days later, the news of Ukraine's deal with France broke. The point here is the same one that Zelensky has been making for several years at this point. Ukraine can't have enough air defenses, so anything that it can get its hands on is very welcome. France's new deal with Ukraine highlights that Ukraine is doing everything it can to solve its air defense challenges, and more SAMP-Ts arriving in the country will form part of that solution. There are other pieces of the puzzle falling into place. On November 3rd, AP News reported that Ukraine had received a delivery of more US-made Patriot air defense systems, which the outlet calls the most effective system that Ukraine has for dealing with Russia's missiles. More Patriots are now in Ukraine and being put into operation, Zelensky confirmed, before adding, "Of course, more systems are needed to protect key infrastructure sites and our cities across the entire territory of our state." New SAMP-Ts may not be quite as adept as Patriots at dealing with Russia's missiles, but they'll be welcome Western additions to go along with this new bunch of Patriots. On November 10th, Zelensky revealed that Ukraine wants to order 25 more Patriot air defense systems from the US, perhaps hinting at the possibility of striking a deal similar to the one it struck with France. Nothing has come of that statement at the time of the creating of this video, but it does showcase that Ukraine is increasingly shifting away from relying on military aid and is now willing to buy the systems that it needs to shore up its air defenses. Ukraine is also working on domestic systems it can use to deal with Russia's aerial threat. On November 15th, The Guardian reported that Ukraine is set to begin mass production on a new interceptor drone, and it has the goal of making up to 1,000 of these drones per day. 3 companies have already started manufacturing, with another 11 in the pipeline, all of which will be pumping out drones that have proven themselves very capable of dealing with Russia's Shahed. Perhaps we're starting to see the germination of a new Ukrainian air defense strategy here. The interceptors will deal with as many of Russia's drones as possible, freeing up Patriots and the incoming SAMP-Ts to handle Russia's missiles. That's speculative. The main takeaway here is that Ukraine's pending purchases of French SAMP-T systems are huge in the context of the constant aerial bombardments the country faces when dealing with Russia. As for the Rafale fighter jets, we hinted earlier that Ukraine is trying to strengthen its air force. And just as with the SAMP-Ts, it's not relying solely on the deal with France to do it. The 100 Rafale jets that Ukraine will purchase over the next decade will be joined by up to 150 Swedish Gripen jets. On October 23rd, CNN reported that Ukraine had signed a deal with Sweden, much like the one it just signed with France, that saw Sweden say it's willing to sell its Gripens to Ukraine, assuming Ukraine can purchase them. The offer was the first made by one of Ukraine's allies that promised a substantial number of jets, meaning France is following suit with its Rafale deal. On November 17th, Newsweek also said that the French Rafales, though older aircraft in the greater context of Western fighters, are still very capable of going up against most of Russia's jets. It also pointed out that Russia's own aerial performance has been poor during the war, despite the country having many more jets at its disposal than Ukraine. That poor performance suggests that Ukraine could start deploying its Rafale jets in offensive operations without having to worry too much about resistance from Russia's air force. That's not to say there would be no resistance, of course, but with appropriate training and jets that are better than much of what Russia fields, Ukraine may just have a chance to create pockets of air superiority that could become nightmares for Russia's forces on the ground. Putin doesn't want Ukraine to get anywhere close to achieving aerial dominance. He'll be furious at France for allowing Ukraine to take a step closer to making that dominance possible. And if Putin is furious now, steam will be shooting out of his ears when he hears that France is going to be cooperating with Ukraine on an even deeper level. Just a week or so before the meeting that led to the announcement of the New Deal, the Kyiv Independent reported that Macron's office revealed that it would discuss multiple levels of bilateral cooperation with Ukraine, including in the energy, economic, and defense fields. In other words, all of the fields that Russia is trying to weaken as it attempts to grind Ukraine down. Security guarantees would also be discussed under the Coalition of the Willing framework, Macron's office revealed. All of this means that what France just did for Ukraine may only be the start. More may be coming. For now, Putin has the arrival of the new Rafale fighter jets to worry about, and worry he should. Those jets may start arriving right at the point when Russia's Black Sea defenses are weaker than ever. How do we know? But Ukraine just proved it by ripping through those defenses using missiles and drones to obliterate one of Russia's Black Sea fortresses. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest military deals with its Western allies. And thanks for watching.